South Korea's Unification Ministry should no longer act like a North Korean support agency. President Yoon Sul Yeol said this over the weekend after appointing the country's new Unification Minister. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Brian Myers. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
First off, what do you think the president meant by Unification Ministry should not act like the regime support group? I mean, what's behind the remark?
Well, it's a bit weird, really, because inter-Korean relations have always been largely managed by the intelligence agency here, with the ministry playing a secondary role. If you look at the Panmunjom summit 5 years ago, who was talking to Kim Jong-un? It was President Moon, his chief of staff, and the chief of the intelligence agency. And most of the time, the Unification Ministry busies itself with, PR activities, educating the public, talking to foreign journalists. So you've got to feel sorry for the ministry because first it gets sidelined and then it gets most of the blame for what's been going wrong. But I think the larger point that President Yoon was making was that it's time to go back to the position that South Korea held in the 1990s, which was that North and South can work together, but only if the North reforms in a liberal democratic direction. And this is in contrast to the Minju Party's view, the opposition party's view, that if North Korea is treated warmly and respectfully as an equal partner, it will begin opening up voluntarily.
Right, because South Korea's Unification Ministry has been playing the secondary role when it comes to inter-Korean relations.
Right.
Now, there are also reports that Japan and the North are in talks to discuss historical abduction cases and related issues. How likely is it that there'll be high-level talks between the two sides? And what will that mean for South Korea if it actually does happen?
Well, we've been hearing that some sort of communication is going on in regard to the abductee issue. Both sides have something to gain from coming to an understanding. If the Japanese prime minister can bring any of those people home, it will mean political capital for him. And if North Korea can present a kinder face to the world, I think it can complicate the partnership of the US, Japan, and South Korea, which Washington, of course, is intent on strengthening. But there are big problems here. First of all, the return of 5 abductees in 2002 was celebrated as a victory for a hardline Japanese administration, the Koizumi administration. So I don't think Kim Jong-un is going to want to be seen as the second North Korean leader who yields to a Japanese hardliner. And another problem is that Pyongyang has always said that most of the allegedly remaining 12 abductees are dead, and the other 4 were never in North Korea to begin with. And this will make it hard for Kim Jong-un to produce any of those people now. But I think if talks do take place, they're going to focus ostensibly on other issues, while the abduction issue gets resolved in a more discreet manner, I think, with a lot less of the publicity that embarrassed North Korea 21 years ago.
Right. It looks like it could be a win-win situation for Pyongyang and Tokyo. But what if South Korea is left out of those talks? I mean, what could that mean for South Korea?
That would, of course, be North Korea's aim, really, to establish its own channel to Tokyo, and in that way, perhaps to drive a wedge between Japan and the South Koreans. That's something that Kim Jong-un would probably be hoping for. The question is whether the Japanese are prepared to play along.
Right. And the North over the weekend also made clear that it has no intention of reviewing the chief of South Korea's Hyundai Group's bid to visit North's Mount Kumgang next month to hold a memorial service for her late husband and also the former chairman of the group. What's your take on this? Why has North Korea left such comment?
Well, it's not all that surprising. The Hyundai chairwoman was allowed to conduct a memorial service at Kumgang-san 5 years ago, but since then the relationship has cooled down considerably, and Kumgang-san has loomed very large in disputes between Seoul and Pyongyang, with the North Koreans confiscating South Korean assets and the South Korean government threatening legal action. I think the Hyundai chairwoman may well have hoped that Hyundai's history with the North would make Kim Jong-un look kindly on this particular request. But it's just not the time for Kim Jong-un to be showing lenience, I think. And the interesting thing, really, is that the request was rejected by North Korea's foreign ministry and not through its unification committee or the Workers' Party's United Front Department. And this is really weird because it implies that South Korea is a foreign country. And that runs counter to the traditional belief in North Korea, which is that the Kim Jong-un regime lays claim to the entire peninsula and the entire nation. And I can't believe that this is suddenly being abandoned. Of course, the regime does like to make its inner workings as difficult as possible for the outside world. It likes to keep everybody guessing. But even so, this is so strange from an ideological viewpoint that we need to see if it happens again.
I see. It looks like the chief's visit to Mount Kumgang is not going to take place anytime soon.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, the very first meeting of a South Korea and U.S. nuclear consultative group, known as NCG, is reportedly to take place this month. Now, how much progress can we expect to see from the group? I mean, what's likely to be discussed during the inaugural meeting?
Well, let's recall that this nuclear consultative group was decided upon during the summit between Presidents Biden and Yoon last April. And at that time, South Korea was pushing for America either to deploy nuclear assets to South Korea, to share nukes, in other words, or to allow South Korea to develop nukes of its own. And the White House was not prepared to agree to either of those things. So the decision to form this group was really Washington's way of reassuring the South Koreans of its commitment to the full defense of South Korea in the event of a nuclear attack. Now, I think President Yoon would probably like to see the consultative group develop into something like the NATO nuclear planning group, where the defense ministers of NATO countries actually set collective policy. But the Americans are just not ready to allow the South Koreans a planning or a decision-making role. So in answer to your question, I don't expect to see any great progress at this inaugural meeting. I think instead it's going to serve as a forum for more rhetoric about the strength and the indestructibility of the alliance. And I think we'll probably be hearing more stern words to Pyongyang about its nuclear program.
Right, the group is, like you said, is in early stages still. So let's see how the group plans to roll out.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Professor Myers, as always, for your insight.
Thank you very much.